to order. I know Bob Wegbright's on his way, he'll join in process. We've got a couple of folks here tonight, and I'd like to start the agenda with that. We've got the library here to present their budget, so we'll handle that and discuss that. Then our representative from our actuaries, that's our CBiz, is now here, and we'll talk next about the police pension. I would like to throw out a couple questions about OPEB, so you have something to bring back at the next meeting with your colleague. And then last, the third kind of open question as we go into the budget cycle later at the business meeting is going to be our capital accounts and capital projects over the next couple of years. And so I want to have a discussion with the committee to wrap up what our process ought to be for working with the whole council, mayor, the office to prioritize those and give some policy guidance as part of the 2017 budget. So with that, turn it over to the library.
Okay, I got lucky here. I got enough copies. I'll go through these. So, because I have another meeting to go to, and I wanted to get this in. But luckily, I have one for Sean here. No, you're going to be here, Sean. Okay. I'm here because I wanted to make sure that all of you are aware of and you know specifically who the library is and what we do and so forth, and why we're asking for what we're asking for. I just want to make that clear. So the first page I have on here basically tells you what the library is. We have one full-time director who collects benefits. And then we have 6 part-time, and they do not collect benefits. 3 of those part-time are what we call assistant-led employees, library employees. And they have special functions like the social media, the technology, the certified, they have to be certified to do the McLink stuff and all of that. And then the others are more clerical. Reason we have only part-time is because we've been trying to watch the budget so that the borough doesn't have to pay benefits. That's the bottom line. So we've been trying really hard to keep that as only part-time. We would much prefer to have 2 or even 3 full-time people. When we did the budget, we gave 3 part-time people the 3% raise and the library director a 3% raise, which we understood is what's going to be given to the borough employees. If that's different, then we'll want to change it, but that's what we thought.
Trying to do it in line.
That's right, we go in line with what the borough employees are. In the budget, you're going to see, I'm going to show it to you, but you have what we call non-salary funding. We have an audit increase in there of $3,500. That's because, according to state law, we have to have an audit every year. But 2 of the 3 years are reviews. And so they only cost us about $3,000. But every 3rd year, we have to have a full audit. And that costs us the extra $3,500. So that's why we have to do that. McLink, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that stands for Montgomery County Library Internet Network. They increased their charges to us, and that by $1,366. That allows all of our community to get books from anywhere else in Lower Marion or Montgomery County, actually, and have it delivered to our library.
Oh, so it's more than just the catalog, it's actual, the transportation of the books back and forth.
Absolutely.
Oh, okay,
You
great.
go online and you say, oh, I want to read
My
War and
husband
Peace.
is a heavy user.
Yeah, and,
Okay.
then
Heavy.
we don't have it in our library, so we
Heavy
have it
user
Yeah,
sent.
that's
that
something I
system.
didn't understand,
Right.
thanks for
That's
explaining that.
Huge.
Yeah, oh, it's a wonderful thing.
It's a great service.
Yeah, I get all kinds of stuff that way. And then last but not least, we're asking for a replacement of the $4,000 that was cut last year because we need to kind of catch up a little bit on some of our orders. All other expenses, as you'll see on the library, the detailed library have either been maintained or cut, depending on how much we need it. The additional funding for the Narberth Library that we get from other people now is state funding, which is less than 6% of our overall budget. And then the rest of it is raised by the staff or the library board, and that amounts to 14.2% of the overall budget. And we do that by our community letter, by our events like our library, our book sales, all kinds of events, things like that, raise money.
How has fundraising been the last couple of years?
It's been good. It's tough. I mean, The community is very, very supportive, so we've got, I forget how many thousands of dollars in there for the community, but we'll see it in a second or so, but, they've been very responsive in sending in money when we send out we only send out the one letter, although this year we may do what we call a non-bake sale letter.
So you're budgeting 25,000.
So that's what we're projecting that we can do. Just so you know, and we send you the statistics, of course, but circulation is up, patrons in the library is up, wireless minutes is up. We're always in there doing that. One of our board members did a value service analysis, which I've attached, which shows that 12.2% of the value, for every dollar that the borough spends for the library, 12.2% of value comes back to the community. And we just recently did a customer survey to see what everybody thinks and what we should do differently and so forth. And we're reviewing them, but one of the things we acted on right away was put in changing tables in the bathrooms. People needed that, the kids, the parents needed that, and we put them in both men's and the women's.
Thank you.
You're welcome. They also asked for more community room space and so forth, and so we're gonna be talking to the property committee too about, how we use the community room and how we can use the community room better for more activities for the library as we go forward. We wanna talk about that, but that's for them, not here. So the total number that we're asking for is $199,747, which is an increase of $13,993, or 7.5%. That's all we're asking for. Here you'll see next to this, last to this, is a line by line. We go over this every month to make sure that we line by line don't go over our budget. Or if we do go over it on one category, then we can make up for it in another category. So you can see going down here, all the income that we expect to get and we commit to. And then the expenses for things like our audio books, the auditors, again, I told you that went up because of the audit. Books for adults, books for children, fund drive, special events. McLink, again, I told you about. Some marketing, we don't do much. The payroll, of course, is always significant. Periodicals, the magazines and so forth, the photocopier, postage, professional meetings for training for the staff. Not much, but some. Programs, that would be the children's programs primarily. We have a lot of children's programs in the summer, and you've probably seen the reports, and Janine always talks about those in the reports. Computer supplies, library supplies, office supplies, telephone and internet access and so forth, DVDs, and then security. We have a panic button for the staff.
Do you have actuals for 2015 and 2016 as well?
Yes, I do. I don't have it with me, but I can get it for you.
Right.
I can absolutely
be
get
great.
it for you, sure.
Do you, again, do you have reserves? Like, do you
Yes.
something, what's your buffer?
Yeah, Jesus, I'll have to go look. I'm sorry, I should have had that with me, but I will say it's in the $50,000.
Oh, okay, good.
Yes, we have a good.
Based on a budget like that, that's
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah.
Something we talked about last year, I think, I'm curious how this is going. Some of the other Lower Merion libraries have been closed for renovation or partly closed. I think Ludington's all back up now.
Yeah.
Has that, is that largely done, or are there other libraries that are like?
It's mostly finished, yes. And what surprised us is, if you look at our statistics, they haven't gone down that much.
They've actually gone up a little bit.
Yeah, that's because people are just coming in more. And of course, the internet's a big draw, and using it for their phones and so forth. But the internet's a big draw, and the proximity to get their books in there, whatever they want, So I was surprised though. I expected it not to go up. I expected rather to go down some.
Right, as
Yeah.
traffic kind of went out,
Yes.
out the door with the
Yes.
libraries, but it's actually good to see that.
Yeah,
it's
that
still
the people
healthy
are coming in.
use.
Well, we get a lot of people in there, and that's what you have here, and I highlighted in red just the totals, because this report is not clean. But, you can see, yes, it's still going up a little bit.
Sure.
So, and then the value of service report is the one that Ken Kravinsky, who's on our board, he would work that one out for us.
I did have a question, just reading this, items cataloged, it looks like it went down year over year, but is that the number of new titles that you're putting into the library?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and We may have done a few less because we did get our budget cut a little bit this last year, so we may have done a few less. But that's what that is. And withdrawn means that they're ones that have been taken off the shelves and people haven't used them, and then gone out in circulation for 5 years or more, then we take them out of circulation.
Right.
A lot of times we put them on the shelf to sell them
Right.
in the foyer. But most of the time, we just, you know, there's a couple ways we can get rid of them. We sell them on our front lobby, or there's, one of our guys goes out to something called Borough Books and another one, and they buy books. In fact, you could sell your own books on Borough Books if you wanted to. You just go in and you put in the barcode, and they'll tell you how much they'll give you, and then we box them all up and we send them to them. They pay us. It's not a lot of money, but it's something.
At least they're being used somewhere.
That's right, they're being used. That's exactly right. They're being used, plus we're getting a little bit of money from it, not just throwing it away.
I'm just thinking aloud here, like, this, by the way, this is always of all the subsidiary organizations, financial presentations, yours are always the most thorough and very understandable, so I really appreciate that. Are there any opportunities, have you guys talked, the office and the library, at all about some of the ancillary costs? I mean, your biggest cost is always going to be payroll, and then, Link and some of those other items, but are there places where the library is spending and the office is spending, and maybe some of the other organizations that use the community building are spending on cleaning or telecom or other things where if we work together a little bit, you might be able to
We haven't.
save some pennies?
No, not really. I mean, the services that, they're the things like for the building, like electricity and all of that comes out of the borough's budget, and so we don't have that. The American Legion is pretty much standalone. And the community room, we don't use it as much as we would like to.
You're not paying for your internet access, are you?
Yeah,
You are?
yes.
Okay, that's where we can help.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to pay for your internet access. That would be in our Comcast agreement, so that's a savings we can work with
Okay,
you
well,
about.
let's talk about that because it's part of our McLink billing.
You've got certain security structures with McLean, if I
Yeah,
recall.
yeah,
Yes, right.
it's part of
We
my
tried this once
McLink, and so
before.
I'm not sure that I'm gonna be able
But it's
to.
worth trying.
It is worth a
Yeah.
shot, yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
worth
modest
shot.
savings.
Especially if you can
sure.
route all that wireless traffic over.
Yeah, right, good point.
All right, well, we'll.
That's a good
Our-
point.
Our franchise
I'll
agreement,
make-
our franchise agreements allow us to have free service to schools and libraries and borough buildings.
All right, well, let me see what McLink rules and regulations are in terms of being part of their partnership, okay?
Okay.
Sean, is this,
And there is certain sharing just baked into the fact that the library's in a borough building, and
Yeah.
then maintenance and capital costs come up, they're absorbed by the borough, so that's
Right.
there too.
Okay,
Right,
okay.
right. We don't really have anything particular for capital, because that's a building.
right, the building is part of property committee's
Right.
project. Okay, great. And Sean, is this, as it is in this presentation, is that what's reflected in the budget that we'll see later?
Yes, it is reflected in the budget.
Good, so that's a good baseline.
Hmm.
The
Excellent.
only other piece of information I would suggest that would help you guys out is a payroll report, maybe
Right.
a year-to-date payroll report of employees,
Okay,
and we could deduce rates and hours that way. It'll just help us.
As we benchmark the other.
Yeah.
Right.
Borough staff too.
Yeah.
okay,
Right.
I
Yeah.
can actually
You're
give
right.
you that now, because, I thought you might ask, so I prepared. We pay less than Lower Merion pays. But it is what it is. We've been bringing, the last couple of,
We should-
Okay.
I would appreciate your keeping that very confidential, obviously, people's salaries, okay?
But you don't have money.
What you see here is the percent increase that's in the budget, okay? And so you'll see the 3% for some, and then there's a couple of people, well, as you can see, the 10% is $1. All right, and the other two are, go ahead.
Was that my utterance that stopped you? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Do you know what your overall yearly hourly is? How many?
Yes, Oh, I have a complete spreadsheet. You want that?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to send you that. Okay. Yes, I have a complete spreadsheet. Let me write myself down. Because it varies, that's how we compute, because everybody's hours are different. So
Yeah.
for example, a person making $11 an hour times whatever.
Yeah, so if you're open,
But we have to keep it, I'm sorry, but I have to keep it under 25 hours because of the part-time thing.
Mhm.
All right.
so
Yeah.
if you're open a number of hours a year and you like to have 2, 3, 4, how many people on staff at all times, that sort of
Preferably.
information is.
Mhm.
Okay, preferably at least 2. However, last week we had some illnesses, so it got down to 1. But that's usually not that way.
It's a bit of a scramble.
Right, you know, we had a scramble, right.
Well, thank you so much for pulling everything
Really,
together
thank you for
for
the
us.
Yeah,
information.
very good. Thank you.
Very
Sure,
good,
after you
thank you, and we
review
look
it,
forward to the
can
rest
come
of it,
back with some
absolutely.
questions, but,
No problem.
work.
Yeah, if you have any other questions, you know where to reach me.
very good, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Second item for tonight, Bob, I don't know about this as, because we kicked off right as you were coming in, is police pension, and we've got Representative Lane Seabids here to help us understand a little bit about what I think is actually our biggest issue that we have to understand in our budget, not just this year, but over the next 5 years. So, and that's a rough summary for the public here who haven't been in every single one of these meetings already, as a couple of them have, is that we've had, and we'll get a good more detailed explanation here in a second, changes in the actuarial valuation ascribed to the pension fund liabilities, for particularly the police pension. It also affects the non-uniformed employee pension as well. But that's meant that our actuarially calculated pension liability has gone from $400,000 to $500,000, very steeply up over the past 2 years to, in this year being 2015 audited financials, it's $2.4 million with the base set of actuarial assumptions. And we just want to understand from the folks who do the calculations, what does that mean? You know, over what time period is that liability realized? What should we be doing proactively to get ourselves back toward funded status? And you know, help us understand as we think about the budget going forward. There's a minimum municipal obligation that we've been making every year that comes out of that calculation. But how much, if any, additional to that in each year should we be thinking of putting toward closing that gap so that we're not landing on somebody who has one of those pensions and being short down some years out line. So if I could kick it over to you for kind of a little background.
Sure, a little background. So what you've seen and what you've referenced most recently is kind of the FASB side of things, so the accounting side, the accrual basis of having a pension plan that the borough sponsors. Previous to this, they were governed under governmental accounting standards 25 and 27. Those have been amended under 67 and 68, and sweeping changes, a lot more disclosure. Front and center, now the unfunded liability hits the balance sheet of the borough, whereas before you accounted for it basically on a cash basis. Whatever your MMO was is what went on the balance sheet. There was not a lot of visibility and transparency front and center on the pension plan as there is required now. The same changes are going to happen for OPEB, so that's just a little lead in there. Very similar way of accounting for it. Take a 10-page report and turn it into 20. That's what's going to happen. And the unfunded liability on the balance sheet, you'll have less flexibility in your interest rate assumption, and I'll get to that when we touch on OPEB. So what this report does not do is determine your MMO.
Right.
Your MMO is calculated under Act 205, and then Act 600 prescribes the benefits payable to uniformed employees of municipalities. So what you have is an every other year evaluation. Every odd calendar year, we do evaluation, which is a different report than this. And that sets forth the following 2 years MMO. So Some of the numbers from that report are used to generate your MMO in the following 2 years. So the 15 valuation was used for 16 and 17's MMO. When we did the 2015 valuation, one of the things we do as the actuary is, on a plan like a pension plan where you're making a promised payment at a future date for someone's lifetime, is you need to bring all those future payments back to today into a present value. One of the important things is, if you're going to make a payment for someone's lifetime, is an appropriate assumption for how long those people will live. So there's published mortality tables, and you look at them, but in a plan like this that's so small, you'll have long periods of time with no mortality. So, you know, you can't do your own study. You don't have a credible size group to say, well, we're gonna use this. You need to follow the herd and use more current statistics based on broad studies, which basically says, if you look at tables from the 80s and the early 2000s, in general, people are living longer now than they were then, to the tune of a couple of years.
So there's nothing we can do about that.
There's really nothing, you know, if you wanted to say, I'd really like to go back to the 1980 mortality table. Yeah, you know, both tables are going to say that a portion of your population is going to pass away each year, but we have many, many years where that's a zero. So almost any assumption we do is a little bit tough to justify, but again, conservatism in my mind rules the day on something like that. If you're not going to account for those extra 2 years of payments, you're going to find yourself down the road without enough money in the trust to make those payments. The other primary assumption is you have a trust fund with assets set aside to make these payments. What will that trust earn? You have financial advisors, you have an asset allocation. A lot of times it's a traditional mix, sometimes 60-40. Well, we all know what fixed income does right now, which is basically nothing. So it's a lot of pressure on equities. And the prior assumption was probably an 8% annual rate of return. Even under a 70-30 mix, I'm not seeing anything to support it. So we had a lot of discussions with the trustees of the pension plan, and we ultimately landed on 7. So the way that a present value works, remember I said you have these ongoing payments to a few people, future payments to the officers still working. They're going to go out to some period of time in the future, bring them back to today at a present value. When you do that at 8%, and then you change that interest rate to 7, the relationship is a seesaw. The interest rate's on one end of the seesaw and the liability is on the other. When you lower one, the other side goes up. So that is a large portion of the increase in the plan's liability. The assets stay the same. So when you raise the liability and the assets stay the same, there's your unfunded liability. And the Act 205 funding requirements dictate how long you take to pay those back. So there is a mechanism in place to work toward paying off the unfunded liability. I believe it's maybe 12 years out if everything stayed the same and all of our assumptions hit. But it's a, you know, you're going to have an officer retire and you're going to replace it with a new one. So this is a generational plan, whereas a lot of corporate plans now are shut down. They're just in kind of slow, you know, slow death mode. They're going to work themselves out of their problem eventually. So what do you do to close the gap on liability? In comes GASB 68. Now it's front and center. You have unfunded liability on the borough's balance sheet. And now you have pension expense under GASB 68, whereas before your operating expense was your MMO payment. Now it's a accrual basis of accounting where you have, okay, what's the 1 year's worth of accrual of pension benefits? Interest on our liability. Well, we expect our assets to perform at a certain rate, that comes off. And where we have some amortization payments, that's GASB 67 and 68 prescribe how long those are, and they're very short. And that's the same thing's gonna happen to OPEB. They've taken the amount of time that you recognize those events, and they've really shortened them.
It looked like it was 5.8 years.
That's on, yeah. It may even be better if we look at a couple of pages. Kind of give it a little bit of context. I won't spend any time on the commentary pages. They're kind of self-explanatory. It tells you, here's our report and what it does, and there's other things that GASB requires that aren't in our report. You'll have to go to them somewhere else. Page 3, inactive employees and beneficiaries. You have 9 people receiving pension benefits today, as of 1/1/15. You have 5 active officers. And this page further breaks down the liability. Service costs, that's that number. The 113,000 is the fancy way of saying that's what 1 year of accrual is. And average remaining service life. So the way that GASB makes you, so let's say we have gains or losses. Like I said, we make certain assumptions. So you need to measure how you performed against those assumptions. And there either kicks out gains or losses. If you have investment activity greater than 7%, it's a gain. If it's lower, you have a loss. You don't recognize those all at once. You spread them out. Asset losses, gains are a flat 5-year amortization. Anything else, assumption changes, actuarial gains or losses, those are spread out over the remaining service lives of the entire population. So the 5 officers have future years of service attributable to them. The 9 inactives, their future service is 0. So you take the sum of the 5 and divide it by 14. That's how you get short. And the same concept is going to happen under the OPEB GASB pronouncements. So that's kind of how that works.
That's a very bold, simple question.
Yeah.
That's looking for a simple answer, obviously a complex way to get there. Each officer that we have, let's say they have an average salary of $85,000, or whatever you use as an average, I don't want to make up an average. What does it cost us per year towards the pension per officer that's on? So when you look at the whole package, you know, let's just use 85 as a core number, 85
Right.
for salary, 3,000 for uniforms, you know, 20 to 30,000 for healthcare, etc. What do we mentally, when we look at, do we have 5 or 6 or 7 officers? What do we use as a number per officer cost? I know the whole concept of it stretches out, but how do you get back
The
to
work that
like-
we do is run on the individual level and aggregate it into one number for reporting purposes. So we will collect the data from Sean on the actual comp. So we have comp history for them. Their benefits are based on an average of comp, 50% of comp, if they get full retirement. And you can express that in terms of what's the ratio to the benefits to payroll. And that's really what your 1 year cost is, that accrual, each year that accrual of benefits. In the police plans that I see, it's in the low to mid 20% of pay. So if you have $1 million of payroll, you're gonna be looking at about $200,000 of annual accrual of benefit.
Yes, we had
And that
a
is-
$8,000 copy of a $17,000, not that you have to kind of put in your mental aspect towards it. That's a very helpful note, thank you.
And that's assuming that the pension is funded.
And that is shown
Yes.
in my other report, so,
Yeah.
and we're gonna
That's what
do
the
that
reason-
again 1/117, but I can go through that report at another time or over a call, whatever you wanna do, to give you context into where the MMO comes from. That might be valuable at a
I
later
think that,
point too.
I mean, for my purposes,
Okay.
that's very helpful. Keep looking at that.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good, you do.
So here, go ahead.
Go ahead.
You go.
Questions are good, because
So-
I'll go on, and I know it's really exciting.
I mean, so the big picture question for me is this, like right now, we've got a liability that's built up based on the present value of the asset pool and expected returns at a rate which, I don't know if 7% is the right rate going forward or whether that's gonna be revisited.
Right.
And present value of liability sort of makes some assumptions about mortality, there's some probably fairly sensitive to changes in those assumptions, but let's just assume that that calculation is right for now, and isn't gonna move. Over what period should we be thinking about closing that gap and returning the plan to funded status?
Right.
And if we're just making the MMO payment, over what period would it naturally return to funded status if nothing else changed?
Right, so, I think it says it in here. Page 9. So as of 1/1/2015, I'm in the bottom half of the page. Remaining amortization period is 12 years. So the way that the Act 205 funding rules work is designed to fully fund the plan over time. The MMO is comprised of that accrual of benefits for the year, so that's your pay-as-you-go cost. If the plan uses trust assets to pay certain administrative expenses, that's loaded back in there, so you pay the trust back. And then you pay off your amortizations, which are historical gains and losses, plan changes, assumption changes, you name it, they all get baked in there, they're all paid off over time, but that's the way the funding rules work. It's designed to that if your assumptions hit and you continue to make those payments, eventually you'll bring the plan to full funding. So that's a rough estimate. One of the components of doing this valuation is you need to do long-range projections of the assets, which means you have to project out the contributions, project out the benefit payments. The GASB rules are such that you're allowed to use your assumed rate of return to discount those future payments unless you have a depletion date out in the future. So if we ran your numbers, and this is not happening right now, if you ran your numbers and it showed in 40 years you were going to run out of money and not have enough cash in the police trust fund to make the payments, you have to stop them and remeasure the liabilities at a municipal bond rate. So you end up with a blended discount rate. Muni bond rates are sub 3% right now. So if you knew what happened when you went from 8 to 7, going from 7 to 3 would be huge. So your unfunded liability would grow exponentially. There is no such forecast on a plan like this, partly because the math is going to work. If you hit your assumptions, you'll be fine. And the Act 205 funding rules are designed to avoid such a calamity. So that's the good thing. So we do that so we can give you a sense of where MMOs are going to go. And again, it's caveated on it. The assumptions need to come true. They need to run out. So if you're making reasonable assumptions, we'll assume they're gonna happen into the future, and we can give you a sense of where MMOs are heading.
Tell us what those, you specify what those assumptions are?
It's the 7% that I talked about. There's other assumptions in the report, but the primary ones that drive the liability are the asset return and the life expectancy.
Do the projected salary increases of 4% and cost of living increases of 3% have much impact?
They do to some extent. If you have officers that are close to retirement, changing that salary growth assumption doesn't really have much of an impact. Most of the pension's been accrued already anyway at their true salary levels. And Act 205 has some older rules in it where if you set your asset return assumption at 7%, or let's say you could do it and you wanted to set it at 9 so that you have a nice low liability. Well, you can't now assume that your salary increase growth is 3. They will not let you play outside of a 3 percentage point move. So you'd have to assume that your salary growth is 6% then. So they don't let you move one without the other, unless you go through a whole study to justify why your assumption varies so much from your growth on assets assumption. And the COLA is negotiated. That 3% it doesn't mean they exactly get 3% a year. Some years it's less than that, some years it might be more, but over the long term. And then their Act 600 caps a COLA. So it's not 3% forever. Okay. Once they hit the cap, then officers get no more COLAs.
Is it a relatively straightforward thing for you to do to, in your model, change the rate of return assumption and to change the, let's call it excess contribution over the MMO annually? I wonder if that's something you could run in the next little bit.
And you mean changing the assumption to value liability, or what if our assets outperform? Is that what you mean? Like actual term versus?
I'm not worried about that.
Yeah.
What a nice thing
I should
to
say underperform, so that you have kind of that stress test.
No, so here's kind of what I'm thinking is we're going into our budget cycle here. We're going to have a preliminary review over the next month of kind of the operating budget of the borough. We haven't dug. This is the first slightly deep dig tonight into pension.
So none of these assumptions are in the projected budget at this point?
The police pension MMO is in the budget. We do have
An
that.
increase, a suggested increase,
No, just the
in what we
MMO.
paid last year.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
So
Say that again.
I'm seeing here scheduled contributions that jump from 105 to 181 in 2000 on page 9. So did we already put the 181 in? Is this, or is this, we're paying out what we owe from last year going into our 2000, I guess in our 2017 budget, we put that in out. What numbers are you using from this conversation what
Are
he's-
you using numbers from this conversation,
Yeah.
or are we using another set of
we're
numbers?
we're using previous, like last year plus 3%?
Percent
or are
or-
we
No,
using-
we're using the minimum municipal obligation, which is also included in your packet, which for the police pension fund is,
Which,
Just under 290.
just under 290. We
Yeah.
had two options presented
Okay.
to us by, Savitz. One was to reduce that, contribution. We were able to, elect to, reduce our net contribution by a little under $40,000 if we, electively reduce that if we wanted to. That would only, in conversations with Marguerite, that would only be prudent to do if the borough was in overall financial stress and it really needed that $40,000 today to meet its obligations today, but the borough is not in that situation, so we're not going to elect, or I'm recommending we not elect
Sure.
to take that relief, that optional relief and make the full MMO, which is, as Dave said, a little less than 290.
So what are we suggesting the increases from last year then? What's the 2016 versus 2017 suggested amount? Much, I don't know where I'll see it in all these numbers.
I did have.
Is it in here or is it somewhere?
The 2016's MMO?
Yeah.
It was about 265.
And what are we suggesting for this year?
I think it's probably already been made.
290. Okay,
291.
so,
290.
so
Yeah.
where's the crisis now?
Well,
There's a crisis, I know, here.
well, no,
I see these numbers.
here, in a
Yeah.
nutshell, here's what's going on, in my view, is this is the MMO year over year.
Yeah,
That's
It was-
historical, that chart, that page.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna do the historical so you can understand the context here. It was 2013, 110, then 105, then in 2015, 181,
Yep.
then 260,
60,
then 290.
sure,
Right.
okay.
And with that, because of the change in obligations, change in calculations, we now have this underfunded status also. And we're still assuming a 7% per annum rate of return, which, as a guy who's at the, early end of being a heavy-duty taxpayer for the next, little while everyone's retiring, seems a little high, still.
I'm gonna buy alternatives.
Yeah.
To give you an order of magnitude, if you
Yeah.
look at page 6, at the bottom is the plan's sensitivity to changing that assumption.
Yep.
So right now, the net pension liability, which is the unfunded liability, is 2.4 million. If we were to go down a full 100 basis points, it would be 2.9.
Yeah.
And then if you go the other way,
It was roughly linear, so if you went down to 5%, it'd be
it's pretty close, yeah.
pretty close. So, I mean, here's kind of what I would like to have in hand, if possible, before we punch a ticket on our 2017 budget. For this purpose would be just a sensitivity table with,
Okay.
across the, down the rows, 7%, 6%, 5%,
Mhm.
in sort of long-term rate of return assumption. Assume the mortality tables are what they are.
Yeah, I'm inclined to leave them where we've set them now
Yeah.
until they're, so
Yeah,
there's a large group called the Society of Actuaries.
yeah.
And they recently did the large mortality study for corporate pension plans.
Yeah.
They're in the middle of doing one for public pension plans. The reason why we didn't jump on to that brand new table is we want to see if there is a different outlook in terms of current mortality statistics in public entities rather than private corporations.
Sure.
And we'll evaluate that table when it comes out and see if it's appropriate.
So that'd be just, 3 rows, because I don't think we need to get any finer grained than that, just to see how low the rate could go. And then across the columns, and let me know which of these two options is easier to deliver, given your model. Either the column variable be the years to bring it to a funded status from 5 years up to 12 years, and have the calculation of the table be what should the annual contribution be, instead of the MMO, the actual MO.
MMO plus.
MMO plus, or for fixed dollar MMOs, what would be the years that it would take to break even.
You do this for multiple municipalities, I assume?
Every once in a while, they'll ask for something like this. Not
Does everybody
a lot of
follow?
them aren't looking to lower their rate of return. They wanna,
Keep the line design, go with the 7%, that's all I'm
don't
asking.
touch my balance sheet.
All right.
May I ask a question? Do you guys want to?
That would be super helpful.
Hi, I'm Barbara Fortner. I didn't
Hi,
get your
Dave
name.
Reed.
Dave, I kind of guessed that from this. I used to work for Towers Watson in retirement, so. It's been a while though since I did a lot of the actuarial work. I was more on the administrative side in later years, but I'm listening to this and I'm also on Borough Council, so I have some questions and just in my mind. And one of the things that I've not been clear on, but I think it's becoming clear from hearing this, it sounds like the borough's funding policy has been just to fund the MMO every year? to contribute to-
Which is the predominant funding policy.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
The MMO calculation comes out, we will give
Yep,
that to
and you're like
them.
going, that's
It's
my
adopted,
contribution,
boom,
boom,
and then
and-
state aid comes
yeah.
in to offset that.
Yeah,
And I
and-
have 1 or 2 townships that will use the state aid as a supplement to the full MMO, but
Yeah.
it's not normal.
Right, and it looks like, until Gatsby was changed, that worked well. I
It
mean,
did, because there was
relatively
really, it didn't hit the financial statements.
Right.
Only the MMO did.
Right, so the question that I have right now is just, what should our goal be? Should our goal be to be 100% funded? That's kind of what it sounds like we're talking about, but I'm like, is that really, is that what Gatsby is anticipating, or?
Well, remember too, that.
I mean, I know we don't wanna be 50%
100% funding certainly impacts the balance sheet, which is gonna flow through to bond ratings.
Right,
So,
but,
you tell me what the needs are of the borough. If you're not borrowing, if you're not floating bonds,
mm,
then it may make sense to get there over time.
mhm.
But if you're having trouble issuing debt, then you have to approve the balance sheet. You may need to, but again, if you need cash, you really
Yeah.
probably don't need it for the pension plan, you need it for other things.
So it's not like there's a requirement to be 100%
There's
funded
not.
at some point. This
So
is.
the Auditor General will publish, so you fall into distress levels.
Mhm. Well, you
And
don't wanna
there's
do
certain
that.
thresholds, well, everybody's in one or another, you're either
And we did.
over 90%, which
we did
most are
cross the
not.
boundary, I think.
You
between
probably
the
went
select
Yeah.
from status 1 to status 2, and they'll make you write a nice letter and put together a, administrative improvement plan, and if you're at a really poor distress level, there are some mandatory remedies you have to take,
Mhm.
such as if you have more than one, if you had a police and a non-uniform fund, and you were managing them both, where you had to aggregate assets and theoretically get, more efficiency through your investments that way. And there's a couple of other things.
Right.
But if you're not staring down those things, then it becomes, the MMO is one thing, can you afford to go higher? I would say pension plans it's either now or later. You're gonna make these
Yeah.
contributions.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, the scale has to balance. You've
Right.
got only a certain
Yeah.
sources of inflow to the plan and a few sources of outflow. And on the last day, the scales have to balance.
Right. But it's not like here's a date out at a certain point where you should be 100% funded.
No.
Maybe the answer is, at a certain point, we wanna be 90% funded. I mean, it's like this.
Right.
I feel like we need to have some of those conversations too, to decide,
Mhm.
how does this all fit into everything else?
And remember, this is a generational plan, so
Right.
as
Right.
one leaves, another
Yep,
comes in.
so it's never gonna be done,
No.
unless you close the plan, which I can't see that happening.
And that's why I think that some kind of table we're talking about would be a good tool for us in council to have for that discussion.
Sure.
And say, well, what time period do we wanna bring this back to funded status, and how much is that gonna cost us annually to do that relative to making the MMO?
And I'm thinking that too, when you say that, you're saying 100% funded status, right?
Nobody said that.
And is that, because if it's something less than that, it would be something different.
Sure.
So, maybe you start with that and recognize, oh, that's where that would get us. Let's see, and what does it mean if we're not 100% funded or 90% funded or whatever? What does that mean to other things?
When you do that analysis, if there's any, and you're gonna hate to give heuristic guidance, but rule of thumb is to say like, hey, if you're getting to 100% funded in 5 years, it's roughly, you can approximate it as being linear, so you'd be 80% funded in 4 years. You're getting funded 100% there is some kind of heuristic we should have in mind to know, like,
Right.
if it's 10 years to get to 100%, it's X years to get to.
Right. The only thing I can think of is being 100% or more funded is, the state does not give you state aid to an overfunded plan.
Oh, okay, that's good to know too. Okay,
So, but it's 5 officers, it's roughly 7,000 a man.
yeah.
So it's, 35,000 bucks that you, but then again, your MMO would be close to zero. If you were fully funded, you would pay as you go, and if you have excess assets, you can use that to offset the accrual cost.
Gotcha, okay. I know you don't want to talk about OPEB without your colleague, but just at a high level.
Sure.
Here's my understanding of what has been going on with OPEB, is it's moving into this regime too.
Yes.
We've been making the annual sort of actual cash cost,
Paying as you go,
paying as we go.
which is the most common
Yeah.
way of sponsoring and maintaining an OPEB plan.
But as a result, up through 2015, we've accrued this future liability,
Mhm.
which again is based on present values
Yes.
of like $1.8 million for the police force.
And that's at, I think, a 5% discount rate. So what you do, you don't have a trust fund, so you're using kind of your own borough's internal rate of return on the general fund,
Okay.
which I believe was set at 5, and the last report that I just saw as a draft, it was 5. GASB 74, 75 is going to change that to be a municipal bond rate if you're not funding it. So even a small trust fund
Yeah.
maybe can mitigate the impact of a very low municipal bond rate. It's gonna force your hand, you're not gonna have a choice as to what interest rate you use.
Yeah. And so, I guess, what are municipalities doing to deal with that? I guess that would be the conversation we want to have with your colleague.
And some are funding, so in PA, in the other clients that I have, some are funding, some a long time ago set aside a pool of assets and have not touched it. And they've paid as you go since then, but it's roughly half funded. Now, this is a pretty large, non-uniform and uniform participation in this OPEB plan.
Yeah.
And 2 others have done recent studies where they said, look, what does it look like if we continue to pay as we go, if we fund, $100,000 a year for this period of time, what do our numbers look like? And we've gone through exercises like that. But some of them are starting to put funds away to the tune of 100, 150 a year. It may scale up in 4 years to 200, and then they'll take a look at where they stand from there. But it just starts to scratch away at the liability. But now they have a trust fund in place where you can use a reasonable asset rate of return assumption instead of defaulting to a municipal bond.
At what point, what percent of the liability would have to be funded in a trust fund for you to be able to flip over to?
That I don't know.
That would be one good follow-up question for your
Mhm.
colleague. The other one would be, as you can imagine, we'll probably want to do a similar sensitivity analysis on getting to some useful point with regard to that. So if you could have that conversation before she comes back for the next meeting, that would be helpful. See if we can advance the ball in the meantime. Okay. Great.
Quick question.
Sure.
What if anything comes to mind with survivor benefits with the pension? Is there any calculation with that if they're married?
It is valued, so if an officer is married, which we assume that they are, so when an officer retires and starts getting, say it's $3,000 a month and they're married, they pass away, there is an automatic survivor benefit, 50% continues to the spouse for her lifetime. That is factored in to the liability, absolutely.
We've got, any other questions for?
You guys have been great, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming in.
It's really
It's
helpful.
Very
Thanks for having
informative.
me.
And look forward to talking to you, I'm sure a lot more over the next couple of months.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
You're welcome.
So committee, I had one more item to get through, and that's capital spending over in 2017 and in subsequent years. This is going to be an area where, as Sean will present a little bit later, when we put the budget together, really in the first edition focused on, thanks very much,
Good night, thank you.
on operating costs and sort of known recurring costs. And the 2 things that we're going to need to give policy, it's kind of 3 things. 2 main things that we're going to need to give policy guidance on are how do we want to handle these pension liabilities, how do we wanna handle the OPEB? And how do we wanna handle capital contributions, capital spending, capital projects? Because that's really kind of those are policy decisions for council, right? To say what's actually on our priority stack for next year
Right.
and possibly the year after, and over what period do we wanna fund it? So I'm trying to think of the best way. I'd like your feedback on what do you think the best way is for us to get to the point by the time we get to the beginning of December to have given our, consolidated opinion as to these are the things we should be these are the capital projects we should be spending money on next year, and here's how much it's gonna cost, and here's how we're gonna finance it the next couple of years. My thought was we've got a laundry list of all, I think, an exhaustive laundry list of all the projects that people have mentioned, from, community building refurbishments to roof repairs to park improvements to new parks to, this office furniture. I think there's a whole boatload of stuff in there. And at one point, we have good costs on a few of the big ones, like the bridge and the roof here, which will actually mostly be this year, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's some things we actually
17, right?
take.
16, 17.
Our
16?
pre-con meeting is tomorrow, Wednesday, yeah.
Wow.
So it should be done.
So there might be a couple things we need to
4
knock
weeks.
off that list, because they're actually getting done this year.
Quite a
But,
few capital projects are getting done this year.
yeah, so we probably need to scrub that, but we have a pretty good list of things that people mentioned. There might be a couple additions to it. What I was thinking of doing was saying, here's that list, and here's we took a very rough order of magnitude estimate of how much these things would cost, like
Right.
10,000, 100,000.
Yeah.
There were some bigger ones. All of that added up to about $1.3 million.
That's it?
It'll be more like $1.5 million when we chuck in a couple of new things like this,
Yeah,
the
okay.
downtown park, and there were a couple other things that people have brought up lately that would knock up a couple $100,000.
Probably like 20 years of park.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is everyone's gonna have different policy preferences, so my thought is everybody take a copy of that thing, and I can try to automate it in some ways, it's easy for people to do it, but you just say, which of these things do I think we should do next year? And then we can bring them all together and have a conversation about, on average, what people wanna do.
Yeah.
I think you got two things running in parallel. If you look at it over like a 10, 15, or 20-year payout,
Yeah.
That's something I think we have to decide how we want to handle money going forward. And then, is it a value of that worth to the community? That's more of a policy, to me, there's two, one's more of a strategic way, the other is a policy. So worth spending $100,000 on X. Or is that something that we're never gonna, somehow pushing, to me, this pushback, the way, we'll do it in 2 years and we have more money. It's either worth it or it's not worth it.
Right.
So,
That's a good point.
I'm not saying everything I want is worth it, but it's worth it more today than it is in 2 years, because we've seen in 2 years, interest rates can go up, cost of doing, I can go out with the school district, and they held off on the new
Absolutely,
buildings.
absolutely.
It cost a ton of money because the cost of construction.
Social services, absolutely.
So instead of doing it instead of taking the list and having everybody say, maybe we take the list and
So
have
yes, right,
everybody
no,
rank.
in my opinion.
Yeah,
I don't think
rank
you
order.
rank them. I just think it's either, you say, yes, it's worth spending X for this, or it's a nice idea, but it's not gonna, make it.
I think there's a really important piece of information missing from this decision process, and that is the actual professionally estimated values of the projects.
Right, there's that.
All we did at this
Very
point
good point.
was
Very good, very good.
throw darts
Sure, you thought you
from
can.
20
Yeah.
feet away.
Yeah,
You have to start spending money to do that,
I think we should be thinking about getting professional help to assess the condition of our capital assets. Use our borough engineer
Okay.
and those resources to understand what it's really gonna take in real dollar values to do the things on the laundry list. And I don't think it's going to be possible to have any grounded conversation about what those costs are gonna look like and what we should or shouldn't borrow until we have that information in our hands.
The only problem you're going into is we've been talking about these for a while, and now we're getting into a budget. I don't know if somebody's gonna really get.
well, some of them we've been talking about for a while, but some are,
The borough has operated without a capital plan,
Yep.
which is not a good way to manage your infrastructure.
Yeah.
good point.
So here's kind of my macro suggestion on that. Agree with you, we need to actually do the work and come up with real numbers for these things.
Mhm.
But we know we don't want to delay doing some of the things, and we know we might not be able to delay doing some things out of next year. Like the bridge might get done
Yeah.
next year, and there are calls for.
The
Yeah.
bridge is not on the palette for next year. It
Yeah.
is a 2018 project from the last
Conversation. In any case, I think we can, at least by having everybody say, like, these are the ones that are definite yeses, the ones that are kind of in that ballpark,
Mhm.
we can figure that there's some amount of capital spending we're gonna wanna do next year. And whether that gets realized in the form of actually executing on the projects,
Mhm.
or if it just means we sock away that much money next year and execute the projects when the natural life cycle of those projects allows them to get done.
Right.
Then at least we've not put away money
Yeah.
for projects that we know we wanna do.
Yeah.
At least that, first approximation, right amount of money.
I think we should, I think the borough should look at creating a process by which it continually evaluates its capital resources, borrows at regular intervals, not when, every time a project comes up, but at regular intervals that are spaced out by 24, 36, 48 months, so that we save on borrowing costs. And we can consult and look at our plan to figure out what it is we're going to accomplish with this borrowing. We can also, if we take our time, leverage grant money, which the borough's has doing a little bit with the Windsor Avenue Green Street quite well, but there's other opportunities to leverage grants and reduce costs to the taxpayers.
Absolutely.
Okay. I
So
like
let's
it.
make sure that gets baked into the budget conversation.
Right.
So when do we have that conversation?
Well, we're gonna start that conversation in the next
In
meeting.
about 7 minutes.
And continue it at the next Finance and Administration
Yeah,
Committee
for sure.
and council
And
meetings
then
up
larger.
through December. We're not gonna be in a position to get to a full 5-year capital plan during this budget cycle, because there aren't
No.
enough meetings. I mean, this is gonna be like.
I was like, I wasn't
it's-
expecting
it's-
that, right?
No, it's a
I'm
mid-
gonna have a heart attack.
So,
Yeah, ambitiously mid-2017.
Quadrupling stuff?
Yeah, so, yeah.
plus,
So-
that's
so-
a bigger problem, is the bandwidth. on it.
Yeah, right, right, right.
So that's what I'm saying, we need to do something that's smaller more, but will get us like
Yeah.
30 to 50% of the answer, and a right enough answer that we
Yeah.
aren't doing something totally wrong next year.
Yeah.
And are actually making sure we base
It's
enough
actionable and we
capital-
can live with it,
yeah,
right?
enough capital spending in our budget next year that we're not putting ourselves in another year of trouble.
I like it.
So,
Like that idea.
if you guys have feedback about how we should use our project list to kind of get ourselves there quickly,
Mhm.
let me know, I'll toy with it this week too.
Yeah, you might have to, I had a little crash. I might have to ask you to resend it, because I don't back up, but I probably should.
Do you have a?
Anything else for Finance Administration before we
So
go?
bad. Yeah,
Brief
yeah,
recess?
yeah. Yeah.
Let's adjourn this one.
Adjourn, everybody.
Is he supposed to present to us?
Oh, are you going to the Finance Administration?
No, there's general.
Yes, they're gonna make a presentation.
Okay.
It's not-